What is the Mets plan for their rotation heading into 2026? We attempt to get to the answer of that question here on the latest edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. That is Jack McKessie. I am Chris Schubert here talking all things New York Mets baseball. Jack, a happy Friday to you. The weekend right around the corner. We're talking Mets baseball. A lot of worse things you could be doing on a Friday. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Chris. I got kind of gaslit today on this Friday by my weather app here in Chicago. It said it was going to be 60 degrees today, and it was at 12:24 a.m. It has been much colder than that since then. Tough start to the Friday, but now that I'm talking about the Mets, it's getting a little bit better, I think. Although this rotation is once again making me think I'm not quite as excited to talk about the Mets.
It's funny that this is the topic that we're talking about today because it feels like the one area of the Mets that we haven't really focused on, mainly because of the players that have left this offseason for the Mets. With Pete Alonso leaving, with Brendan Nimmo and Jeff McNeil getting traded, there's been a renewed focus on, hey, what is your offense going to be in 2026? And then with Edwin Diaz leaving to go to the Dodgers, the question is, okay, we thought you needed at least one reliever with Edwin Diaz. Now with Edwin Diaz gone, what's your plan for the bullpen? And so that's taken up a lot of the conversation. It's been the main focus, but the rotation probably deserves just as much focus as anything else because there's a lot of names. There's a lot of choices. I don't know how many of them are choices that we should feel very confident in going into 2026, but we know the Mets have been looking to add a starting pitcher to this rotation. What type of starter, where they fit into this rotation are some questions that we have. Thought we would spend the afternoon breaking it down and looking at this market. I guess I'll throw it to you here to start. From a free agent perspective, is there a pitcher that has jumped off the page to you that you feel like a Cody Bellinger, like a Kyle Tucker, would be just a slam dunk? The Mets have to go out and add this guy?
Not really, Chris. I feel like my thinking with the starting pitching market has kind of been in line with what I've seen reporting the Mets are more interested in doing, and that's exploring trade options, whether that's for obviously not Edward Cabrera anymore, but a Tarek Skubal or Mackenzie Gore, like options that aren't on the free agent market, because looking back at the last couple of years and the way that the Mets were not really in on some of those top of the line free agent starting pitchers, like a Max Fried, for example, I just don't know. David Stern's philosophy, I think, for building a starting rotation has been to experiment with lower end guys and kind of add on the margins with other options that maybe project better with some extra development or some tweaking of their repertoire or their mechanics. But I don't see them going after any of the top of the line guys on the starting pitching market going forward. And that's why I kind of think that the trade market and looking around the league to see what teams are trying to trade starting pitchers might be a more valuable way for the Mets to build up their rotation going forward.
And I think in past years, it's been easy to highlight targets for the Mets to acquire to add to the rotation because they've been in a position where they haven't had five starters that could make up a major league rotation, where the work that's been done both on the player development side with names like Nolan McLean and Jonah Tong and Brandon Sprout and Christian Scott, and that group, along with some of the flyers like Sean Manaea panning out, and David Peterson's resurgence.
Clay Holmes is a flyer that panned out as well.
You just have so many options to choose from. So now, instead of it being a situation where the team needs to just add quality arms because they don't have enough to fill out a rotation, now they have grown and developed, this is a good thing, into the position of the starter that they bring in needs to be better in a significant manner than what they currently have on the roster, or else it is a poor use of resources. And so if you look at the rotation, at least according to Fangraphs for 2026, they have Nolan McLean in the first spot. They have David Peterson as starter number 2. They have Clay Holmes as starter 3, Sean Manaea in the 4th spot, and Kodai Senga in the 5th spot. Now, I would argue that Nolan McLean is your ace. He's your number 1. He's your opening day starter. Even though that game's going to be on Peacock and not SNY, he'll be the starter on opening day. Clay Holmes feels like a really good number 2 or number 3. I'm willing to bet on David Peterson being more 2024, first half of 2025 David Peterson. And so it's a really decent to above average top 3. And so you're looking at Sean Manaea and Kodai Senga as potentially the areas to improve and upgrade. Then you take that and you go over to the free agent market and you see Ranger Suarez, you see Framber Valdez, you see Zach Gallen, you see Chris Bassett. Those are the top 4 in terms of projected WAR for next season at the top of the market. You have to ask yourself, are these worthwhile enough upgrades to dethrone the 2 names I just mentioned, but to also block Jonathan, Brendan Sproat, Christian Scott from being able to contribute to this rotation? And I would argue there's a world where any of the last 3 guys that I just mentioned could beat out Kodai Senga for that 5th spot. That feels like the flimsiest of the 5.
Yeah.
Because if the Mets are going to give out a 3, 4, 5, 6-year deal, whatever it's going to be for a starter, and we know David Stearns doesn't like going beyond 3 years for a starting pitcher over the age of 30, but if you're going to do it, they have to be a significant upgrade over the back end of this rotation, but they also have to be a significant upgrade over the potential of the players behind, and that's where this becomes a really difficult proposition.
I think also something the Mets have to consider is not just bolstering the back end of this rotation. We've seen Kodai Senga and Sean Manaea be really successful, high-end, front-of-the-rotation starters. I think the Mets need to, well, building out this rotation and making it better overall, look into creating some extra, I don't know if it's in the trade market. I don't think it's in free agency with the top names you mentioned there in Framber Valdez, Ranger Suarez, Zach Gallen. I think they need to get someone else who can start a playoff game for the Mets because right now, looking at this rotation, the only guy I have faith in is Nolan McLean, and he's about to enter his 2nd season, essentially his rookie year, because he didn't hit the rookie qualification threshold in 2025. So, like, you could say that the Mets are banking on Sean Manaea and Kodai Senga bouncing back as a way to enter that playoff starter conversation again, but I don't want to see them just kind of add on the margins anymore. Like, I would like to see them be a little bit more aggressive, and that's why I think the trade market is a more enticing option for the Mets to take for upgrading the front end of their rotation rather than just the back end. Because like you said, they have options that can come into their own. I'm thinking specifically of Jonathan, Brandon Sproat, Christian Scott as your 4 and 5 starters, as those younger guys that can develop and maybe eventually become the front of the rotation. But going into most of their second seasons, Christian Scott obviously missed all of last year. I would like to see the Mets add another veteran who can be kind of a more known quantity towards the front end of the rotation, and that really makes it look like a more well-rounded picture that you can rely on a lot more than so many of the question marks that I have going into 2026.
Yeah, I think you'd feel better with a rotation that had 3 solid starters, 3 dependable, reliable go-to guys in the 1, 2, and 3 spots. And then I think you feel very comfortable with the idea of spots 4 and 5 being, kind of a battle royale between Sean Manaea and Kodai Senga and Brendan Sproat and Jonathan and Christian Scott when we get to spring training of, okay, boys, there's 5 of you, there's 2 spots. You got to go out there and earn it. You got to go out there and grab it. Nothing is going to be guaranteed. Sean Manaea, I don't care that you're in year 2 of a 3-year, $75 million contract. Kodai Senga, I don't care that you're getting paid decent money. If these kids come out here and they deliver in spring, they're going to take those spots from you. But in order to do that, you kind of need 3 guys at the front that you really believe in. And I'm not sure the Mets have 3 guys that they really believe in. Despite only it being 8 starts, I believe in Nolan McLean's ability, his moxie, if you will, his composure to be that frontline guy. I'd feel a lot better if there was somebody in that number 2 spot that was an upgrade over David Peterson. That moved Clay Holmes to that 3 spot. And then, David Peterson's in that battle royale with a little bit of a leg up because of 2024 and the first half of 2025. He's got the best resume out of anybody in that group. So you give him the benefit of the doubt, and you can allow competition, which is what David Stearns ultimately wants there to be. But you need that one missing piece. And I actually think there is a guy on the free agent market that fits that bill. And I don't think he's going to cost as much as Framber Valdez and Ranger Suarez because it's not one of those 2 guys. I would take a really close look at Zach Gallen on a potential 2 or a 3-year deal. He does require some tweaks to his arsenal. He throws 6
Mhm.
pitches. I would dump that down to 4. I would go fastball, changeup, and then he would have to pick between one of his slider or his curve. I think the curve plays better, and then between his cutter and his sinker, and I would pick the sinker. He threw it more in the second half last year, and he found some success with it. And his fastball doesn't play great, so maybe that sinker can help him keep that velocity and keep righties off balance. And I don't think he's going to cost a whole lot. He was great in the second half for the Diamondbacks last year when they made a late push to pass the Mets and the Reds for that final spot. He was the main reason because they were down Corbin Burns. He took over. They traded Merrill Kelly. He took over as the ace of that team and delivered. And so, yeah, you worry about him moving to New York and the bright lights and the big stage, but to be the number 2 behind McClain, I think he's got the arsenal as long as it doesn't cost a ton of money. And mainly it's really years that I think is the problem for the Mets when it
Yeah.
comes to adding a starter. If you can get him on a 2 or a 3-year deal, I think I would feel way better. McClain, Zach Gallen, Clay Holmes is my 1, 2, 3, and then that big glut of guys battling it out in spring for those 4th and 5th spots.
Zach Allen's a really interesting one because obviously I'm not as intimately aware of how well or how poorly his 2025 season went. Like, I just kind of have seen the bigger picture view. A lot of the narrative was that he'd been struggling for a lot of last season in Arizona.
He had a bad
Correct?
first half. Bad first half.
Yeah. And so I think there's a really good chance that because of that tough first half, he's going to need to be a little more willing to sign more of a shorter term, not necessarily like a 1-year prove it deal, but something in that range where it might end up working in the Mets' favor. Like you said, a shorter length and maybe not even that high of an AAV for a guy that needs to tweak some things. I think what's such an interesting part of this starting pitching conversation that we're having now, and it kind of applies to the whole staff, is last year going in, we talked so much about how Jeremy Hefner really proved how good he was at tweaking already established veterans' repertoires and mechanics and getting the most out of what they had with Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana. Like, he really made the most of that rotation in 2024, and things kind of fell apart down the stretch in 2025, and it led to him essentially being shown the door. And so now Justin Willard, we saw what he did in Boston with Garrett Crochet and how well he pitched last year for them. It's going to be interesting to see if the Mets have that kind of faith that they had in Jeremy Hefner to bring in a guy like Zach Gallen, who did struggle last season and for a decent portion of the season. You said the first half, and see if they can, on a shorter term deal, make the most out of that and bring him in and not risk it being like a Frankie Montas situation, especially because you want Zach Gallen to be kind of the elite version of himself that we've seen in the past, a guy that can start playoff games for you and be a guy to add to the front end of the rotation rather than kind of rolling the dice and taking a gamble on him being a 4 or 5 starter and then end up battling with those younger guys. So it's an interesting thought. I just am very curious to see what the Mets' philosophy is in. I think they're going to add someone. I'm really interested if it's going to be a Zach Gallen type who has struggled or someone who has been consistent but not quite as high of a ceiling as Gallen could bring for the rotation.
Yeah, I think ideally what the Mets would tell you, and this is going to sound like David Stern's cope, so I'm already ready for the backlash that this social clip, if this is the one we put out, will get. But I think that their philosophy would be, or at least their mentality would be, can I find somebody that can buy me 2 years to get these kids into the rotation, right? Can I find a high upside bridge for 2 seasons while I let Brendan Sproat develop as the number 4 or number 5? If I give Jonah Tong opportunity, right? If I give Christian Scott opportunity and not throw them to the wolves like I kind of did at the end of last year, and Nolan McLean was the guy who, swam in the sink and swim situation. You want to give those guys every opportunity to grow and develop at a much more reasonable pace and projection than what was asked of them last season. And so I think the Mets would love, and this is why they're kind of allergic to the idea of a long-term deal, is there's talent here, right? Take McLean out, just look at the young guys. You look at Sproat, Tong, Scott. Those are 3 guys that could be answers for you at the rotation, and you need to give them a platform in order to answer the question, but you also need to be respectful to your fan base and put out a winner in 2026. And so Zach Gallen fits more what I think the Mets are going for, because I don't think Ranger Suarez is accepting a 2-year deal. I don't think Framber Valdez is accepting a 2-year deal. And I have my issues with both of those pitchers individually in terms of their makeup and their stuff that I don't necessarily think they're, great fits. But Gallen feels more, and Chris Bassett is the perfect answer here. It just ended so poorly with Chris the first time around that I
Yeah.
just don't see that being a possibility.
He does not want to come back.
And Justin Verlander would also make sense as like a 1-year bridge. But again, that didn't end well when we did this, in 23 with Justin Verlander, or 24 with Verlander. And so it just, Gallen feels like the highest up the board option that would accept a short-term deal that would fit exactly what I think the Mets want to do. Whereas they have a high upside option, they have somebody that can help them win right now, but they also aren't committed long term so that they can actually evaluate the guys that they have on their roster. And if they trade any of those guys to go get a Tarek Skubal or a Mackenzie Gore or a Hunter Green, fine. That's an acceptable outcome here either. But I just don't think the Skubal asking price is something that David Stearns is going to meet.
I think you're right. It's especially with what the Cubs ended up giving up for Edward Cabrera. I think the school market's going to be
I mean,
tough and
there's
hefty.
control with Cabrera, which kind of makes it a little weird to go 1-to-1 because you're getting Cabrera for 3 seasons, whereas Skubal has to be assumed to be a rental, right? Because until he puts pen to paper on an extension, you're getting a 1-year rental of Skubal. But I can tell you what, Skubal's not re-signing there. I mean, the arbitration battle enough is going to.
I was going to say
tell us
that's the biggest wrench in the whole Skubal situation. Is like it might benefit trade suitors for the Tigers that Skubal is clearly going to be disgruntled with the team after they're separated on $13 million in arbitration, offering versus request. So, I mean, the Skubal market's going to be tough, but like, I guess the trade-off is for a Skubal or a Green or a Gore, maybe Jonah Tong or Brandon Sproat or Christian Scott end up being that kind of caliber pitcher. But we know, like, Gore, Green, and Skubal are proven commodities, proven assets at the major league level.
I would want those guys over the current group for sure. Absolutely.
Right. And it's kind of the Family Guy meme of like the mystery box or the boat. Like the mystery box could be anything. It could even be a boat. So I like the idea of giving up some of the prospects to bring in someone more proven, but like I also like the idea of bringing in a guy like Gallen who can prove himself with some tweaks. I think it's just a matter of if the Mets are going to end up spending any money to bolster this rotation or if they prefer to explore the trade market, which has been a lot of what the reporting I've seen has said.
If you look at the Fangraphs free agent list of starters, right, the top of the market, and I have this sorted by projected WAR for this upcoming season. So just looking at 2026, Framber Valdez and Ranger Suarez lead the way, and then you have what I think is kind of a tier break where you have Gallen, Bassett, Zach Littell, Justin Verlander, John Gray, Max Scherzer, Nick Martinez, kind of all clumped together. Aaron Savale, like I could see David Stearns, because this feels like a very David Stearns thing to do, right? He may be really interested in Tarek Skubal. He may be somewhat willing to give up what the Tigers are asking for Skubal, but he may let me pick a name here for this example. He may sign Aaron Savale to a deal, right?
I know, yeah, that was kind of and then me too.
Try to work through the beginning of the season with the rotation that they have and give all these young guys opportunity. And if it works, then he doesn't have to trade for Skubal because the rotation will be great. If it doesn't, he then can always pivot at the deadline and go back to swinging for the big fish, right? It feels like he can, this is going to drive people crazy, but he could use the first half of the season as like an experiment to give these guys a chance. And unfortunately, that means like Kodai Senga just can't be a part of the rotation if you're going to do it that way.
Right. I don't know what the plan is right now, I guess. Like there's many routes that the Mets could go. I'm not super in love with really any of the free agents on the starting pitching market. Like I do think the Zach Gallen point is intriguing. Like I think a Lucas Giolito could be an option with the familiarity with Willard in Boston. But like I don't know that either of those guys give me a ton of confidence, as the potential is all there to be a front end starter. And I really think that's what the Mets need. And now that's where I keep going back to the trade market thing, where it's like, you name Skubal, Gore, Green. There might be other options out there that we don't know about that the Mets are pursuing in some kind of trade. There was a lot of rumors about the Mets and the Padres getting together on some kind of trade involving starting pitching. I don't know if that's something they're still considering. I just think they need to do something to make this rotation, at least take away some of the question marks that are in the rotation right now, because I think the ceiling, the potential for a lot of these guys, especially the Sproats and the Tongs who haven't gotten a full season under their belt yet, or a full even major league spring training under their belts, could really be those guys. But there's no one that has proven themselves really besides Nolan McLean. And I think the question marks for Holmes, Peterson, Senga, Manaea are too big to go into 2026 with that being your group of starting pitchers.
And Giolito's interesting because he had good results last year for the Red Sox in the 26 starts that he made, but the under the hood stuff doesn't really, nothing like stands out as a significant trait like a elite strikeout ability or an elite control with a low walk rate or like elite ground ball stuff. It all just feels like, I don't know if he got lucky, but it just feels like he got lucky based on what I'm looking at. And, you know, the thing with Framber Valdez, because he's really the top name that everyone is pointing to for the Mets to go after, man, he just gives up a ton of hard contact. Like if you hit the ball off of him, it could go a long way. And I know he's a ground ball merchant, and I know the Mets are shoring up their infield defense, and so you would expect them to turn a lot of those into outs. But boy, if he starts missing too regularly, it feels like it could be some long days at the office. And do you really want to bet on a multi-year deal? You know, because he's looking for 4, 5, 6 years. Do you really want to bet on just that one trait? Because he doesn't. He walks a ton of guys. He doesn't strike guys out. He gives up hard contact. He's a ground ball first guy. It just that's a tough ask on a long-term deal.
And not for nothing, he's, I think, the oldest name that we've mentioned here as like a realistic option as
He's
one
32.
of the top guys. I mean, 32 is not old, but Ranger Suarez is 30, Zach Gallen is 30, Aaron Savali is, I think, 31. So is Lucas Giolito. I'm low on Valdez, not just because of some of the under the hood hard hit contact stuff, but that clip of him crossing up his catcher on purpose. I mean, if the Mets want to improve the vibes in the clubhouse and with the rotation and everything, I don't know if that's the kind of guy you want to bring in.
It's a great point that the Mets have clearly decided this offseason they needed to clean up some clubhouse issues. Do you really want your marquee offseason acquisition to be a guy who the thing he's most known for last season is showing up a teammate in just the most unacceptable way imaginable? Like, that's very counter to what the Mets have kind of told us already. Now, just going back to Gallen really quickly, because if you look at Gallen's StatCast page, it's very similar to, Giolito's in terms of there not being like a signature thing that stands out. The reason why Gallen is somebody that I would suggest is because I think the ceiling is there, but he's not going to command a long-term deal that Valdez and Suarez. So I feel like you can kind of get the best of both worlds, and that kind of feels like where the Mets want to live. And, Fangraphs says his projection at basically Frankie Montas plus, because they have him at 244, and the Mets gave Montas 234. So it's the Montas deal with a little bit more, and I feel like I would do that deal in a heartbeat. Like 244, I would do right now if Gallen would sign it.
And based off of what happened with Frankie Montas, that if things don't end up working out with Zach Gallen, like the Mets are fine with cutting bait and letting him walk or DFAing him if things really come to that. But it makes sense, like it's more of a prove it shorter term deal. I think Suarez and Valdez are the more proven, reliable starters, and that's why Fangraphs, I'm looking over here, has them at 5 years apiece pretty much for those contracts as the median option.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Gallen at 2 years 44, I think that's something that, assuming that the Mets can bring him to his ceiling with Justin Willard and the pitching lab that they have, there's a real potential for him to outplay the value of that contract, to play above the value that the Mets would be getting him at there at 22 a year.
Also, I am all the way out on Ranger Suarez. I know that his StatCast page glows red, but you throw a sinker 90 miles an hour, that's asking for trouble. That's a problem.
It doesn't project well once he gets above 30. And if he, 5 years down the line in that contract, I don't know if the Mets want to, cap the ability of themselves to let the younger guys make a spot for themselves
Right.
in the rotation.
Ask yourself this question, because the idea of Ranger Suarez next year might be good for the New York Mets, but what you're going to need to do to get Ranger Suarez in the building, are you comfortable with 34-year-old Ranger Suarez with a sinker that's probably topping out at 88? Are you
Right.
comfortable with him being blocking Jonathan or blocking Christian Scott or blocking the next crop of pitching prospects that the Mets are going to be able to develop?
Free agents that could be on the
Right.
market in 3 or 4 years.
And I'm sorry, like, that's not a gamble that I would be willing to make. I would much rather go the Zach Gallen route. 2 years, high ceiling, the floor's a little bit lower, but I know that 2 years from now, I can fix this. Like, I can immediately open up a
And
spot.
that's kind of been David Stearns'
I know,
whole thing.
I know. I somehow talk myself into just being David Stearns. It's
Yeah, I mean, it just makes a lot of sense. You've talked me into Zach Gallen more than I was at the start of this
Yes.
episode. So as far as free agents go, though, like, he's kind of it that really intrigues me.
Well,
I
he's
think,
just
because the ceiling is so much higher than a lot of the other maybe second tier names behind Valdez and Suarez.
He's just the best pitcher that's going to accept a Mets-friendly deal. And what I mean by Mets-friendly, I just mean in terms of the year commitment. He's the best pitcher that's going to probably be willing to take a 2 or a 3 year deal.
I mean, it's kind of apples to oranges because Devin Williams is a closer and a relief pitcher, but I kind of see like a similar vibe going here where it's like Williams struggled last year for the first half of the season and obviously got better down the stretch, but the deal could end up being really good for the Mets in terms of the value that they ended up paying him on a short term. Obviously, that's a closer, and Zach Gallen, you hope, is going to be a front-end starter, but if things work out and he hits that ceiling or he's a lot closer to the ceiling than he was last year, I mean, that's a guy that you can rely on to start in the playoffs, I think, and that's exactly what I'm asking for, and I think we're asking for as fans.
So I think where we got here at the end here is, if you're going to sign somebody, sign Zach Gallen, but just go trade for Tarek Skubal. Like, just make it easy on us all.
Tarek Skubal's so good, man. Like, top 3 pitcher in baseball easily.
Yeah, I mean, after Skubal, Mitch Keller is the name that's been linked to the Mets a bunch. I don't know if that's going to move the needle in any significant way. Mackenzie Gore, are you going to have to pay a bonus tax because they're trading him within the division? And so I just don't see the Mets doing that. Is Cincinnati really going to let Hunter Green walk? Then after that group, it's hard to really come up with a massive name that would change the outlook of the Mets rotation. I know everybody loves to talk about Sandy Alcantara, but he just has not been the Cy Young caliber pitcher in a long time.
No. And I mean, last year was especially bad for him, and I don't know. I don't think the Mets are going to give up. I mean, that's another team that's in the Division 2, right? So you're going to have to give up a little bit more potentially in prospects for a guy that's you're adding another question mark, I think, to the rotation there.
Yeah, so to me, it's it's almost Skubal or bust in so many ways in the trade market, because I just don't know how many other people, and I don't even know if Skubal's actually available, right? Like,
right.
It's
like,
just kind of hypothetical.
I think the Tigers are going to try really hard to. I mean, whatever this arbitration thing is, I think they're still going to try really hard to keep him around because he's kind of the face of the team right now.
If you were going to try really hard to keep him around, you would just pay him the $32 million, right?
Yes, I mostly mean like, they're not willing to trade him unless it's for a massive price, I think.
You would have to overwhelm them right now. Now, talk to me in July when they're 5 games below 500, and
well, he's going to be the top name of the trade deadline, kind of regardless.
Yeah,
unless the Tigers are, somehow on pace for 110 wins.
Interesting times for the Mets in their rotation. Different than years past where there's been a very clear hole to fill in the rotation. There is a hole to fill, but it comes at a cost this time around. So the Mets have to be very, very careful with how they choose to fill the needs that they have in the pitching department. That'll do it for us here. Another edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast in the books. Do us a favor. Please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening to us. Leave us a 5-star review as well. Helps us out a ton. and share the podcast with a fellow Mets fan friend. The best thing that you could do for us is sharing an episode of this pod, whether it's the podcast version, whether it's the video version, with somebody in your life that is a Mets fan. The best way for you to support this show. Speaking of the video version, over on YouTube, Jack McKessy, McKessy, is where you can watch all the episodes of the Bleav in Mets pod. We're back early next week as we continue to wait for the Mets to do something, anything, to upgrade their team. It's been a little bit since they've made a move. I guarantee you there'll be something that'll happen before spring training rolls around, but we're moving closer. Pitchers and catchers reporting at the end of this month, and before you know it, we'll be talking actual Mets baseball soon enough here on the pod. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week, and as always, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.